Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a great pleasure to have you all here. We're very excited by that. We're also extremely excited to have our guest speaker. He has a lot to say. He's chock full of really interesting things, so I'm not going to belabor this introduction. Just suffice it to know that he has a sterling academic career going right now. He did his PhD at the University of Regensburg, which I think our German department recognizes, and worked at Penn State while he was writing his dissertation. He also has, is anyone familiar with Wesleyan University in Milton, Connecticut? He came as a study abroad exchange student there and became interested in America and Connecticut from that experience, and also small liberal arts colleges. Felix Kronenberg's interests are partly a result maybe from his PhD program, which was American Studies, and he did advertising. And I had a great dinner with him last night, and we talked about Mad Men for about 15 seconds. He said he cannot watch Mad Men because it's too close to his dissertation. What a shame. But in any case, games are also a big part of what he does. And if you know James Paul G, and some of you know him and love him as much as I do, you know that games are attracting our students in a way that maybe some of us aren't. Probably most of us aren't. And why is that? How do they inure our students into that world when we can't do that? Well, maybe we'll be able to find that out a little bit from this talk. And another area that he's really interested in is actual physical spaces, not virtual spaces, but physical spaces, learning spaces. And we, I think, are birds of the same feather on that score as well. So without any further ado, I present you Felix Kronenberg.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and it's been such a lovely trip out here. And it was nice to see some snow, because we get this about once a year, and our college shuts down if we have a little bit of this. So it's nice to see this already in October here. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here and talk about this topic that I keep coming back to, even though I'm saying, oh, I'm going to stop this and just fully go into space design, but then I keep coming back because there's so much promise in this. And the recent Horizon report stated this as one of the areas of growth in the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to see increasingly games popping up in education, whether we like that or not. And the way I see this, you can use them in a wrong way, in a right way, just like you could use a novel in a very bad way, in a very productive and fantastic way. And games are just like that too. And I think we should demystify this a little and take more control of this, because the industry, both the educational, the publishing industry, but also game publishers are increasingly going into this market because there's a lot of money to be made. So we really have an intersection of financial interests here, but also educational interests. So let's look at some of these things, and I'll show you some bad and some good examples as we talk about them. And I really want to tickle out a little bit the advantages, why games are so powerful, but also I'll talk a little bit why we don't, if they're so powerful, why we don't use them all the time, right? And so I picked out the 3 qualities that I think are the most important ones. There are other ones, but I think motivation, identities, in the plural, and agency are things that I think make games extremely powerful, and I'll talk about them. Usually we think about motivation first, they're fun, but people don't play games just because they're fun. So we'll look at some other type things too. They can actually be a lot of work as well. So you don't have to, you can just snap a picture. I'll show this at the end. You can also go to my blog. I have some cards here. If you're on the listserv here, you can find out also through the website and get to this presentation. Everything's online, so no worries if you can't write something down, so you can just listen. And so one thing I wanted to start with, and this is a very American way of starting, is start with a narrative. And good games do this too. They start with a narrative. And so I wanted to picture me, and I'm probably one of the first of this generation who grew up with computer games. I was a little younger than this. I was about 11 years old, and I had this learning moment with a computer game that was absolutely stunning. And these games were nothing like what they're nowadays. In fact, it looked kind of like this. And here I was 11 years old, I had about a year of English in Germany, I grew up in Germany, and I wanted to figure out this game. It was completely in English, and I sat there for hours, and my parents were thinking, oh my God, he should play outside and do something real. But what actually happened is, I was sitting there with a Greek mythology book, because the game was actually situated in a Greek mythology setting, and an English-German dictionary trying to figure out this game. And if you look at this looks like very traditional education to me. But I was doing it because I wanted to play this game. Nobody made me do this. And later on, this dawned on me like, oh my God, this is where I learned about the river Styx and giving a coin to the ferryman, because you had to type it in. I figured this out myself. My teachers may have told me this before, but it was me figuring this out because I wanted to do. And I think that's the big power. That's a big power of these games. I was also transported to another reality. I was not myself. I was not some 11-year-old. I was a hero trying to get into Hades, trying to solve this mystery. I've been trying to find this game, and I still don't know what the name is, but it stuck to me. This has stuck to me more than any English class I've ever had. So a very powerful learning experience, and it went unnoticed. It went unnoticed. And so ever since I started working on this academically and professionally, I've been trying to get back to this. And this is very hard work to get back to this, because I made the choice, not my teachers, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But my identity was somebody else. I was not Felix Kronenberg, 11-year-old boy learning English. I was somebody else, an adventurer who could use a foreign language to solve a mystery. That was very powerful. And it didn't matter what the graphics were, etc. So we're going to look a little bit, how can we get back there? And the question is, can we get there? As teachers, as an institution, can we channel this? So that was a very interesting thing to me. It was also the agency that was given to me, that I was the one doing all the actions. The game did not progress unless I typed something in and it happened. And those were real choices. I saw the whole universe there, and I could go somewhere. The game parameters are actually very simple, and I know there's some people from computer science here. There were very few branching trees of, you type this in, there were maybe 3 choices. This was tricked. This was a trick on my mind, but it worked extremely well. So I want to talk a little bit about motivation and why people play. Obviously, fun is a way of playing, right? Leisure time. But if you look at something like this is from World of Warcraft, the best-selling computer game. I personally haven't played it. I've seen people play it. I'm staying away because it's a whole lot of work. You have to learn so much. The wiki that has the information on World of Warcraft is huge. I think it's the second largest, or at some point it was the second largest wiki on the web. People write all kinds of stuff, and so if you look at this, there's chat going on, there's different character stats, there's all these symbols that all represent something. They're all symbols that represent certain types of meaning, and there's action going on here. There's so much information. It's work. People literally put in work, clicking, doing things over and over again, and they do that in their free time and actually pay for it. So why is that? And one thing is, I think it's the motivation that you get constant rewards. It's like a drug. I mean, some games like these have been called EverQuest. Have you heard about that? It's been called EverCrack because of that. Because every few minutes you get this rush of dopamine, being like, oh, I level up. Oh, I find this item. Oh, I'm doing this. Oh, I'm doing that. And it's spaced out in a way that you get these from time to time. Whenever you're like, it gets a little boring, boom, you get a little more. So it really is like a drug, but so you keep going back. Even if you stop playing, you want to get that rush again. Now compare that to language learning, where you start and your rewards take years or decades until you see them, right? Oh, I can finally use the passive voice in actual conversation. That takes years. And so no wonder this is more powerful, because you get this rush, you're an addict. And there are studies that suggest that this may be very addictive, you know, and they're designed to be addictive. And they can be unhelpful too. So it's a different type of drug, a different type of addiction. But how can we use that? How can we tap into this? Now, motivation really is interesting because you play this because you don't have to. The moment you make somebody play this, it's going to be less fun. And that's something to keep reminding ourselves whenever we work in designing games or wanting to use them in the classroom. The mere fact that we tell people to do that is going to start decreasing the motivation. This is called, and those of you in the teacher program know this, it's called intrinsic motivation. It's something that comes out of you compared to extrinsic motivation, which might be an exam. Oh, if I don't do well, if I don't study, I get a bad, negative grade, so I better study. And this intrinsic motivation, there is a term, if you reach such a high level that you're kind of losing everything around you, it's called flow. You may have heard that term before. People who play this for hours and hours reach this flow. And I reached flow back then as an 11-year-old. I'm very sure about that. How can we get there? That people reach flow. One thing is immersion. And we all know this from study abroad. If you're studying abroad, you're immersed. It's all around you. You don't notice. You stop noticing. You're in a different reality. And Murray, who wrote Hamlet on the holodeck, let me read from here, wrote about this quite some time ago. Actually, it's the Star Trek metaphor. Writes about immersion, that it's the experience of being transported to an elaborately simulated place which is pleasurable in itself, regardless of the fantasy content. We refer to this experience as immersion. Immersion is a metaphorical term derived from the physical experience of being submerged in water. We seek the same feeling from a psychologically immersive experience that we do from a plunge in the ocean or a swimming pool. The sensation of being surrounded by a completely other reality. That is what makes it really powerful, and that's what makes this very powerful. You're not in your room, you're transported literally somewhere else. And so immersion is a big part of motivation. And that's why we still think the holy grail of language learning, and it's my holy grail, is study abroad, immersing yourself in the language, being elsewhere, and not noticing that you're learning. You stop noticing that you're learning, and that's when really powerful learning happens. And it's also something where we can trick young people into learning when they stop noticing that they're learning, but they're actually learning, right? Other people may not know that they're learning, but they will. And as for me, it took me years to realize that I was learning. Now, what games look like nowadays, if you teach languages, are kind of like this, and I don't want to divide them or make them bad or anything, that's not my goal, but I want to look at games, how they're usually used in the educational context. So this is actually by the Goethe Institute, very prestigious language institute in Germany. This is shooting vocabulary based on the picture you see. Well, this one is you see a text, and I don't even know how they can call it a logical game, and you have to see these words and then write the German word there. That looks very much like a workbook to me, all of this. It's very like this year, matching activities. They're graphically spruced up. They give you the illusion of interactivity by clicking on a mouse, but in the end it's the same as making a line in a quiz somewhere. And they're all full of it. Memory game. This one, actually, and I call this chocolate-covered broccoli. It's this game for supposedly learning words about fairy tales. And then all of a sudden you get to a scene where it's like, now start cutting the roses. And it's just arbitrarily, let's put a little fun game in there. Put a little chocolate on the broccoli so that we can make it more digestible for the kids. Trick them. It's really tricking people. And so you don't get immersed. You don't get this deep connection. Even very elaborate games like this one, which is free for the iPad, can be played online, Lehrabenteuer Deutsch. This looks exactly like a textbook. You can play this, you hear a conversation, and then you have to follow. And listen to the directions. Straight out of a textbook. You have to kind of match this letter. It's more of a puzzle than actually, you don't actually have to read what's here. It's listening to coins and counting them. It's really exercises that are just like in every other textbook. They're just in a digital format. And I wouldn't call these a game. I would call them an activity. And it's fine if it's good to do activities. I'm not against those. But don't call this a game. this is all graphics from the game, and then there's a lot of behaviorist kind of like, you know, pick 1 out of 3. If you get the wrong one, it'll tell you that was wrong. Now click on the next one. So, so the problem is when people, and I'm actually on the board of advisors for a major game now, and it's a tricky process. As soon as you start putting professors and instructional technologists together and say, let's build a game, you're automatically going in, but they need to load this, and how about this? And then you cram all this stuff in, and what happens is, and I like this quote for that is, the challenge in creating computer games, education games, is to adapt game features for instructional purposes to engage the game cycle that sustains self-directed interest without squeezing out what is enjoyable about games in the first place. It's squeezed out, and trust me, eventually the game becomes no more fun and becomes an activity, because that's what we do as teachers. We want them to learn this stuff and not this stuff, and we want to kind of control what people learn. But games, you learn something that you can't control, really. So that is an interesting phenomenon I find. There are some good educational simulations. This one is probably the most immersive, closest that I can think of at the moment. It's called, you might have heard it as Tactical Iraqi. There's in Pashto, there's some other languages. I think there's one in French now. And these are meant to train soldiers in getting them ready to go abroad. And they train them in a three-dimensional immersive environment. But the games are just part of a curriculum. They're very tightly integrated, and we don't get to use this as civilians. So I only see this at conferences, but feel free to click and see what they have. There's some YouTube videos. It's a very interesting game, but it is more a simulation. And why this is so successful is that it ties into what the needs are. These soldiers are going to go over there, so this directly relates to what they're going to learn. Now, shooting a parrot, when I see a parrot here, is not something that relates to a lot of students. It's kind of, so that is something that is very, very close. And I think what's very interesting is, for language learners, is the notion of possible selves that is very motivating. I mentioned earlier the identity part. Who can you be? Who do you want to be? Who do you not want to be? What are you afraid of being? Those are aspects that you can try out in a safe environment in a game. And I'll come back to that when we talk about identities. But first, I want to talk about agency. You remember I talked about agency as somebody, even in a limited system, as somebody experiencing complete control. I had choices. Now go back and think about a traditional classroom. We've all been there, right? Either as a student or a teacher. Who controls it? The teacher comes in, the students look up, and then the teacher starts and has some sort of structure, right? They will wait and do something, and they will react to what you do. When you say, please stop, listen to me, they're all going to stop and listen. As long as they're good students, right? But it's kind of structured in a way that we structure it. The book structure it. There's chapter 1, there's chapter 2, and what comes after chapter 2? Not chapter 5, but chapter 3. It's all already laid out there. There's very few choices they do. The choices are sometimes behaviorist, there's sometimes communicative choices, but they're really still designed to have you talking about this today. Now we're talking about this. The whole structure is laid out for them. And that's not true agency. That's not true agency. True agency in games, and Sid Meier, which is one of the most interesting and innovative game designers, calls it a series of interesting choices. That's what a game is. It's a series of interesting choices, and you make the choices. If you don't make the choice, the game will not proceed. And Murray calls it the satisfying power to take meaningful action and experience the results. So seeing the results is very important. And this is an example called Scribble Notes. You can get it on your iPad. You can change the language. And basically what you do is you have a certain task that you have to do, and then you can solve it in a large number of ways. And you start by typing this in. This can be changed to a variety of languages. And then, so for example, you type a ladder, the ladder appears, and then it asks you which type of ladder. This is a leader, the word Leiter, but this is something made out of wood or aluminum, and then the ladder appears, and then you can give it to people, and the game proceeds. But you have to type in the language. Very easy game too. It's just a whole lot of language in there, but you have a whole lot of different choices. You can solve the game in many different ways. Now, I'm not saying that this is something you could successfully put into a classroom, but this is something, if this is something that you're interested in, you can learn a whole lot of vocabulary this way. And we'll talk about the interest that people have in different things. Some people will love this, some people will hate this. So, another interesting game, this is coming up in English and Spanish, is Storyteller, where a story is told and you have to move different items and characters so that the story actually happens. And if you don't move it in the right way, then the story won't happen. And there's multiple ways to get there. It's coming out this November, and the developer told me that it's going to be available in Spanish and maybe some other languages. Fantastic game. Simple, but very fantastic. So the interactivity that we often see is not something the interactivity that we see is not something where we have complete control. The game plays us the same way as we play the game. And this is, the term is ergodic or ergodicity for that, where the computer game has certain options for us. The programmers program that in there, but we get the illusion that we can do whatever we want to with the game. And there are actually two levels happening. There's an intermediate level and a high level story, narrative that's happening. The one that is planned by the game, but there's a lot happening in our head. When I was playing this graphic adventure, most of this was happening in my head. It wasn't happening in these like black and white dots on screen. This was in my head, just like when I was reading a novel. It's happening in your head. And a lot of these narrative games play on this. This is called King of Dragon Pass. It's basically a series of slides, and the fantasy content is kind of what turns me off this game, but the concept is brilliant, where you get a number of situations and you have to solve them, and you have to make a clan, a fantasy clan prosper. And it's very powerful. This game is over a decade old, and it's now been brought out on the iPad, and it's very well received. And so the content isn't good, but the idea of this is phenomenal, because you're creating something, you're molding your clan over time, you're making connections with these characters. This could be, instead of a textbook, you could build this as an ongoing narrative. It's very, very powerful. I'm going to skip this one. But I did want to talk a little bit about identities, and not just individual identities. To my part here. I was talking earlier about the learner identities of our students, and me as an 11-year-old, not being this 11-year-old, but being a hero, an adult. I could be somebody else that otherwise I couldn't. We do this a lot in language classes already. We do role plays, right? We do interactive things. Now you're this person, now you're that person. But it's not really the same, it's not meaningful, it's not your choice often, and you often don't buy into it. I still, after teaching years with the same textbook, can't relate to the textbook characters. I can't. I've seen them many times. I still don't know what Professorin Schulz, where she is, and all these things that the book thinks we know. But the identities, and that's a powerful thing, is we can be somebody else. So, I talked about, I did advertising, so I really like this poster from Nintendo actually. Who are you? This is actually asking you identity. You see here the scotch tape up there. You can be anybody. You can be Mario. You can be somebody else. You don't have to be you. A lot of people don't want to be themselves. Not all the time, right? There's some really weak sides about everybody. We can do something else, be somebody else. And so who do you choose to be? And those identities, how can we create these identities? When we do role plays, we do nothing else. The language learner identity is particularly problematic because our identity is tied so much to language. Language is an identity marker for us. Not only where we're from, but also our first language. So Burr writes, this is about constructivism. Firstly, it is clear that both structuralism and post-structuralism see language as the prime side of construction of the person. The person you are, your experience, your identity, your personality are all effects of language. This means that we can only represent our experiences to ourselves and to others by using the concepts embedded in our language, so that our thoughts, our feelings, and how we represent our behavior are all pre-packaged by language. Now take the language out of this, and who do you have? And it's a very humbling experience if you go back as somebody who's teaching languages on a daily basis and take a new language, and all of a sudden you're voiceless. Your voice is gone. The person you're sitting next to, all of a sudden you can't even say the most basic things. And it's a very scary experience. And So we're taking part of their identity away. Now these are young people who may not have a very solid self yet. So they may still be struggling, they may have a crush on the person next to them, they have all kinds of things going on in their thoughts. Who are they? They're still trying to figure all this out. And then we take the language away, and then they're completely lost. They're scared on the inside. And games don't do that, right? With games, we give them back a certain voice. There are other ways to do that, obviously, right? But games may be one way of giving them some sort of voice and some sort of identity, and try out different things. If you play a game, again, you don't have the awkward, pimply teenager anymore. You're a hero. Or you can be an old man, or you can be a fairy, or you can be a dragon, or a king, or an adventurer. You can be any of those things. Another picture, it's hard to find these pictures. This was actually, I was under 10, I'm sure. But this is me and my uncle playing a very early version of Pong. This was Christmas, obviously, and we played together. And this is I love this picture because we're both, as you can see, in the same kind of pose, interacting with the computer. And if we look at social identity theories, and if we look at social psychology, I would describe this as an in-group here that is created. It's putting us in the same kind of group setting. So we're together playing with this game, even though we're playing against each other. But we could be playing with each other as well. So creating a sort of identity is very important. So identity is not something that's only individual, it's also something that is very social. If I'm here as a teacher, just by the way the classrooms are set up now, mostly, and the way the classes are set up, all of the students are one big in-group and I am the out-group. And there's a certain polarity to this where it's like, oh, it's the teacher and us. And it's never us together, like me with the teachers. And we're trying to get there more with concepts like flipping the classroom, you may have heard that, of decentralized teaching, no sages on the stage, all of these current trends, participatory learning, all of these trends essentially create that the teacher is no longer in the out group. We're trying to build an in group together. And it's nice, as you can see, I'm connecting as a person, as this little kid, with my uncle. And yes, you can do it through other ways too. We could play a board game, we could do other things, throw a ball. So a game is just like that. It can create an in-group. And I think what we really shouldn't forget is that games nowadays are not something like they used to be, something that a weird group of like teenagers who don't have friends, that's the stereotype, the cliche play. Everybody plays games, they're part of our culture nowadays. And if we teach culture nowadays, we can't ignore games. If we teach films, they were very controversial. We teach with novels, we teach with YouTube videos. I remember in 2005, some faculty were like, "Oh no, this YouTube thing. I don't know. I'm very skeptical. How could you teach a class not with, not with YouTube nowadays? It's an essential tool." So ignoring games is ignoring a large reality and a large part of our students' identities, of part of their lives. So at least we should acknowledge that they play games. Maybe we play games too, and talk about it. So I've looked at many textbooks. There's hardly ever the question, do you play computer games? Which games? How long? How many hours? It's just not in there. But they spend hours doing that. We know that. Not all of them, but many of them do. And there is, in recent years, there's been an increasingly academic interest in games. So there's an academic interest, but there's an industry interest in this, but then there's also a cultural interest. And as we see this more and more, I'm sure many of you in the audience play games or played games, at least it's a time issue for me nowadays. More than anything, I still love to play them. But they're embedded in our culture, and the more teachers come up, the more young faculty come up, they will have grown up to that. To me, it's normal. I don't care if people play game or read a book. I do both. It's just that games take a lot of time, unfortunately. So just to show you a couple of influences over the years, how this is going into culture, you may have seen Lola Rennt, Lola Runs, very famous German movie, which is basically set up like a computer game with 3 different episodes. She dies twice, third time she lives, and she always runs through the same thing. It's set up like a level, it's shot like a computer game. Very dynamic, very cool film if you haven't seen it. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, more recent American film, very much computer based. I mean, you look at this movie, and if you've never seen a computer game in your life, especially a modern one, you're going to be like, what is this? You know, so you're missing cultural references nowadays. It's increasingly part of our reality. There is a term, Henry Jenkins, I believe, coined it, called transmedia, where games are just part of a media empire now. If a movie comes out, there's a game with it, right? And then there's a book with it, and then there's website, and then there's this and this. It's overlapping, and there's more and more games that are, the lines between games and videos and films are kind of blurring. So these are not separate entities anymore. They're increasingly part of a larger growing culture, and I wanted to show you a very brief, where's my mouse, clip here. This is a very short machinima film that students created, one student. So it's not very remarkable, but the main thing is, this is a clip from a computer game narrated over. If you search for machinima, there's film festivals about this. People capture games and then transform them into something else. So there's a game where characters from a shooting game actually talk to each other about peace, and so there's very interesting things. So the medium itself is changed, and it's something that wasn't intended by the people who created the game, but it's what the people make out of that. And there's a whole culture behind it. As I mentioned earlier with World of Warcraft, people write tons of stuff on this wiki. Why do they do that? When writing an essay is so hard, why do they spend hours writing on this like fictional game? Because they care, right? Because they care. And so these are called affinity spaces. I think James G. coined that term. Affinity spaces are those spaces that are associated with the games, that aren't actually about playing games, but that are next to it. And I think, and I'll get back to this, that playing games and using games for education is not about the game, it's about how you tie it into what you're learning, about preparing students before, about reflecting on this. So the learning actually will happen afterwards, not actually during the play, if we integrate it. So now, of course, this doesn't work anymore, so I'm going to click here. Oh, there we go. So I wanted to say, creating these groups of learners is very powerful. Here you see us in our language center at Rhodes, and we're playing actually a non-digital game, but we also play digital games. And we have game evenings in our language center where people choose, and half the students choose video games, and half the students choose these kind of games. And it's we talked about it yesterday, it's a fantastic game, Who Am I? It's a classic, and the students love it. But they also love these other games. So it doesn't have to be. So going back to this exercise compared to that, how is this immersive? How does this give you agency? How do you create an identity when here you just have to put the word order together? I mean, that's a writing activity. And then this person here that we're supposed to follow, there's no identification with this. And I'll talk a little bit about how students receive this game, because I have students write about these games when they play them. And it doesn't have to be graphically fancy. This is something that Vassar College did years ago. I believe they're still doing it. At least they did it till a couple of years ago. Called Musigang. It's built on a Mu, which is basically a multi-user environment. They're 2 decades at least old. And it's mostly text-based with a few crude graphics, but it's very powerful because of the identity. And I had the fortune to play during a workshop many years ago a game, and I still think it works. The technology is a little old, but it was called Stasi, and it was playing in East Germany, and you were given a role of either being an East German secret police officer or a resistance fighter. And everybody else in the room played the same game, and you interacted via text chat. And it was amazing, because I was a resistance fighter, and people came up and said, hey, where you going? And you don't know who that person is. And you don't know who in the room it was. And it created this feeling of fear in me, of being like, well, I can't tell that person. And so I had to use language to be like, well, you know, I'm going to this square, but I love the party. And so you kind of had to play with language. Very powerful idea. And the technology doesn't have to be flashy or dimensional to be immersive. That's all happening in your head, not necessarily in flashy 3D graphics. Now, why are these games absent in our curricula? There's a couple of reasons. For one, it's a technical issue, it's expensive, people don't know how to utilize them. There's now, just as a little technical hint, if you use the Steam store, you can search by language and you can see if the audio is available, and you can just switch your language and it downloads the foreign language version. It's a fantastic tool, and even if you don't use it yourself, have to tell your students they can do this. I just talked to a student before I came out who wants to work in a zoo, and he downloaded this German zoo game and said, oh my god, I learned so much German vocabulary about animals. And most people wouldn't care, but he cares. It was what he cared about. So part of this is not that we should make these games, play them in school, but tell our students, if you're playing anyways, why not switch your favorite game into German? What you care about this, play that. One of my students is playing the forensics game that Rice University has free online. It's called the CSI game. It's all about forensics. You switch it to Spanish or English, and I couldn't care less about this game. I don't want to be in forensics. I'm not a science person. But it's powerful if you want to be, because you're connecting with it. It's relevant. It's situated, right? And that's what we want to do. And that's what a lot of the books that we use are. They're lowest common denominator. They're like vanilla flavor. They're not offensive, but they're not really exciting. But you want just something that people can make a connection with. That they are, wow, this is me. This is what I want to do. This helps me. This is what I want to do. And when we talk about lifelong learning, and it's one of the goals that we should all strive for, if we can create the self-sustaining cycle and get them excited about keeping up, they're going to forget it all. They will have some benefits from learning it, but we don't have to kid ourselves after 2 years of German. If you don't use it for 20 years, you know, it's marginally effective. But if they do this in 20 years, absolutely fantastic. Another thing why we don't use this is games need work. Like this, you mentioned James G., the quote that no learning medium is a technology like fire, where one only has to stand near it to get a benefit from it. It's work. You can't just say, here, play a game. That's what we all try to do. We want to have this holy grail of, oh, you just play, and then we don't even need instructors anymore. We want to replace the people. We can't do that. Games can be a part of that, but a game needs a lot of work if we want to implement it. And it's really hard to kind of match it up with curricula. And I know we're all interested in this, and we have part of our job. They have to learn X, Y, and Z. Well, if the game doesn't teach X, Y, and Z, we're going to be accountable. And increasingly with a culture of assessment, there's going to be, well, maybe they learned all of these things that are way better and more meaningful, but they're not on the test, so who cares, right? And so that's a really tricky aspect of integrating this. So this doesn't work in most K-12 schools. You can't just use that, and that is a big problem. And one thing that Games and Squire, his name is actually Games, his last name, say is that there is always the research side too. And if you look at these game studies, they always look for scientific evidence as to how effective are these games. How do you measure that quantifiably? Well, how do you measure it if 20 years ago I remember that I have to pay the ferryman a coin? There was no study that could measure that kind of stuff, right? And so it's very difficult. By the time you have a well set up study about the effectiveness of game A versus teaching tool B, the game's already out. It probably doesn't run on your computer anymore, right? So it's a really hard thing, is proving the effectiveness in this very quickly, rapidly evolving field. So that's an issue. That's it. There are probably more problems that we have nowadays than we have answers. But I still think we have some solutions. I wanted to show you a couple. This is a karaoke-style game on the PlayStation that you can switch to different languages. You're competing. There's a competitive element. I put in a little video that you can watch of the Spanish class. You can play it together. But there's also on the PlayStation one of my favorite games. It's called Buzz. And the way this looks is you play a virtual, it's like a virtual game show. You have 8 of these wireless buzzers, and people play against each other. The students love this. They play outside of class. And you have you can switch it to multiple languages, the audio, the text, everything's in the foreign language, and you're competing. And I got a bunch of faculty together. I'm not going to show the video, but you can look at it later. I told them, here, get a buzzer and play. We all played this in French, and it was very powerful. All these faculty were like, oh, I don't know. And all of a sudden they have these buzzers, and they were like, oh, I can press here. Right? The choice is between 4 answers. It's very behaviorist. The game plays you. But you have the illusion of, oh my God. And you're also picking an avatar, another person, another representation that they really like. So some of the students in the video, you hear that one of them named himself after me, and he thought that was hilarious. And so they pick other characters. So if they feel it's real to them if they win or lose, but it's not directly them who's losing, it's the character. So they're saving face, and they're less scared of interacting with it. So there's 2 videos. I'll invite you to watch those later on. So what's powerful about this game is you see immediately, did I get this right or wrong? You get immediate feedback. And good games give you immediate feedback so that the next time you do it, you know how to do it correctly. That's what good games do. And what's powerful about this one here actually is that you can write your own quizzes. So I have my students write their own quiz show, and actually the semester review, this is the workout, they write 1 right answer, 3 wrong answers. The semester review then was playing throughout the semester as a game. And it was very obvious the good students who had been studying, who aced the final, won the game. And it was very interesting, but they supplied the questions, and they were pretty hard on themselves, and I put some in there. So there were cultural questions, grammar questions, very different things that all mattered, but they were not like a quiz or anything. They were played like a game, and we could see who was doing well. So one thing, and I don't want to read this quote right now, but debriefing is very important. Talking about the game, I mentioned that earlier, is an important part. If they just play the game and you don't mention it, you don't put it into context, you're losing where the language learning happens. It doesn't happen during the game. It happens afterwards, thinking about it, reflecting about it. That is really important. So if you want to integrate a game into the class, it's a whole lot of hard work. And the Goethe Institute tried to do that with help worksheets, etc. And I try to include it into a mid-semester course. This is a mid-level German course where we have a series about games. The students play them, they write essays about the games, and I get feedback from them. They say, this Goethe game was terrible, and this game was awesome. And so I get feedback from them, but it's something, we have something common to talk about. It brings us together as a community of learners that I'm part of, because I have to play the games. And if you want to implement the game, you have to play the game. You have to play it multiple times, because you don't know where the game is going. If you just have them play it and you've never played the game, you can't do that. The same way if you teach a novel, you have to read the novel. But since this is not linear, you have to play it more often, and so it's really hard to evaluate games and find out what they're all about. They're all about something different for everybody else. So let's play a little, and then we'll have a few minutes, but can I have a volunteer? I just want to show you just something practical.
Volunteer? Yeah.
Do we have a volunteer? Could you go to the computer here, please? And we're playing a game called 20 Questions game, and I just need you to be my computer jockey here. All right. We're going to play this in English, but this game, you know the analog version, comes in a variety of languages. We're going to play the Think American. If you can click on Think American, it's available in a huge number of languages. And so just fill something out, the gender. We don't have to, just put something in there. Put
New identity.
20 and female. So what happens if I play this game, and this is a fantastically self-contained class that the students love, click United States and click on play. I don't play the game with them. I'm going to be standing here, probably sit here if I could, and I usually tell them what some of the vocabulary beforehand, very briefly, but then the class plays. So how this works is we're going to come up with an item. Very quickly, the students are going to do some brainstorming, and let's say we're going to say projector. Okay, that's our item. You can pick anything. Students have picked migratory goose, witch, zombie, different rubber tree, and so then the computer asks the question. I'm not asking the question because I'm back here. The computer is asking the question. Can you read the question to the group, please?
Is it classified as animal, vegetable, or mineral?
Please, I'm not here. You tell him. He won't do anything unless you tell him. And these, okay. And then please read the next question. These terms the students will have all gotten. We briefly went over these to make sure they know about them, please.
Is it flexible?
No.
Would you give it as a gift?
Yes.
And now there's going to be different answers, usually from the student group. And usually I go in and moderate and say, well, a projector, would you give it who would you give it to? And then they're going to be like, well, my mom, but it's expensive. Okay, why don't you give it to somebody? And then eventually we're going to argue and we're going to find a common solution together against the computer, against the virtual out group. Okay, so, and you're going to make the call. So if it's not moving along, the moderator will move the game along.
Is it heavy?
Yes. Maybe.
And so relatively, now we can talk about the relative weight of projectors. And so we're talking about things that are actually almost interesting now because we're trying to solve this game together. It's not abstract. Of course, it's kind of silly to say is a projector heavy or not. And the textbook, if the textbook has is a projector heavy or not, we're going to be like, that's a stupid question. And they all have these stupid questions. But right now, we have a purpose, we have a task, and we know about task-based learning. We have the task to make this game play with us. So let's say sometimes, okay?
Is it worth a lot of money?
Yes.
Can it be tamed? Is it green?
Irrelevant.
I guess if you ask. Do you hold it when you use it?
Sometimes.
Can you lift it?
Yes.
Does it beep?
Yes.
Sometimes.
Do you use it when you write?
No.
Does it produce light?
Yes.
Is it used in a game? Is it a synthetic material?
Yes.
And sometimes the students will struggle. Obviously, when most of us are native speakers, they're going to struggle and be like, well, what is synthetic? And then I'm going to help them. So all of a sudden, I'm the helper, helping them play the game rather than the enemy being, you have to learn this word. No, I'm helping you play this game, right? So I'm changing the role. It's still the same kind of stuff that a textbook might have, being like, discuss this item. And we're just doing animals. The textbook has like, what is faster, a cheetah or a snail? And it's, it's those questions. But so here, I'm not asking them directly. The computer, he is, right?
Does it play music? No, sometimes.
No.
Sometimes. Can you put something into it? Is it very, very expensive?
Probably.
No.
Probably.
No.
Can it be used for recreation?
Can you see everything?
Is it usually warm?
Yes.
And we'll quit here. I let you play this because you can play this by yourself. And I wanted to thank the moderator and computer jockey. And the computer usually gets it, and we have a lot of fun. And I don't know what's happening either because it's mysterious. There's something happening that we don't have control over. So we had Witch, for example, guessed zombie, and then we talked about the differences between those. And I put in kind of grammatical things when it was, is it heavy? Then I put in, well, is it heavier than? No, it's lighter than this, but it's heavier than this. And so all of a sudden you have comparisons in there. And so you're putting all of those things they've learned into a theoretical context. And we talked about different things, and it's been really amazing because the students brought a lot of expertise. I don't know if a cheetah, eats this animal or that animal, but we can solve it together. As you can see, all of the questions are here. Now, what happens after we play this? This doesn't take long, 15 minutes maybe. It's a good start. Let's put this back into this. So what I have them do first is a handout where it explains what the game is. We do a little text reading, but it's relevant because they're actually going to play the game, so this is necessary. And then they're going to see what these words mean, because something like vermutlich, probably, they might not know. But it's very limited vocabulary, and by clicking on it, making a choice, by the end of the class, they'll know it. Oops. And so what we do then is actually and this is what we do afterwards, when we're ready, now you're playing with a partner. And now I don't even have to explain how this works. So the whole time we're in the target language. Then I just say, okay, now you two, play it. You pick a word, pick one from the book. Don't pick something like rubber tree because she's not going to guess that. Pick something that's in the book. Please play. And then they start playing. They have a good time. They have meaningful conversations. I can go around. And so I don't have to give them lots of instructions about it. And they don't even notice that they're all of a sudden starting talking to each other. That's a very nice way. First, we're playing this together. Through the game, they're learning this. And then afterwards, they can play it with each other, but then they can also play it at home by themselves if they want to. Some of them do that. They really like that. The questions are kind of a guidance. What could you ask? And so there's a lot of grammar involved. Asking, is this lighter than this? And I sometimes play it where I don't let them out of class unless they guess what I'm thinking. So I write it on a piece of paper, put it there, and say, I'm not leaving until you guess it. So they come up with questions like that to get out of it. There's other games like this. This is called the Akinator, multiple languages. This is about people. So if you do, if you use this for characters, literary figures, politicians, I've used every single fairy tale character. It guesses it. It gets better too. It was made by a French programmer. You can play it on the web. I got the address here, available in many languages. You can buy it on the iPad too. So it's really flexible and it's amazingly good. So these games bring people together. And I did want to stop with something that are games that you can actually implement. A lot of these games are big research projects. A lot of these tools that they're talking about with gamification, etc., they really involve. And if you're on your own, you maybe have a projector, you can buy a PlayStation, bring it over there and install stuff. That's really hard to do unless you have institutional support. But some of these browser games, and increasingly games on everybody's mobile devices, are increasingly powerful. And I think those games are better because they bring us closer together. We just played a game together, and it would have been nice to have a little more time to do it. But it creates a nice atmosphere, a group identity. And if I wanted to show you the images from our language center, whether they're computer-based or based like this, the students come together and talk to each other. And that's essentially what we want as language educators, is having students communicate about meaningful content, express themselves, and create an identity as a learner doing this so that it's something self-sustainable afterwards. If we can't do that, if I can't do that, then I failed. They may all ace their whatever test they have to do. If they don't do that, if they drop language, if they drop German after 3 semesters, it's over, and then I have not succeeded as a teacher. I do have a couple of slides for gamification. That really is the concept, you may have heard this, of not punishing our students, of saying, oh, this is a mistake and this is a mistake, but rather saying, you're going to level up. Oh, now you solved all this vocabulary. Now you're going to get a level up, and now you're going to get better. We always punish them and say, we take points off, and in the end, it's like points taken off, and it's never rising. So we could do things, even basic, and that's more a gaming principle. A vocabulary test, instead of saying no, wrong, is saying, okay, you take the test. Oh, you didn't do it? Well, take it next week. Oh, you didn't do it? Take it next week. Eventually they're going to know the vocabulary. Isn't that the goal? Isn't the goal that at the end they know the vocabulary? So who cares if they do it on the first try or on the 15th try? As long as at some point they take it. So that could be another way of using game principles in giving them something for doing certain things, instead of just punishing on predetermined aspects. And so that's where gamification really comes in. Let me just very quickly look over this. So there are different games. The problem with all of this is they're very age group specific, they're context specific. Not all of these will work if you're at a liberal arts college compared to a rural elementary school, very different scenario. So depending on where you teach, it's really hard. But there are more and more people doing research on this, excited about this. There's different conferences, the Calico and IELTS conferences. Increasingly you have presentations and discussion fora about games. Increasingly there's literature. And my blog, I have a couple of things, so you're all going to have to link to that. I do have a couple of games, and I keep putting things out there. But it is a lot of work to find these good games and then actually think about how can I use them. But it's too powerful, and that's my last word. It's too powerful a medium that we can just ignore it and say, it's not there, let's not do it, right? It's silly stuff. No, it's not. It's powerful, it's meaningful, it matters to people, and I think it behooves us, I'm glad I can put that word in there, behooves us to think about this and try really, really hard to integrate this more. Our students, I think, will thank us, and it makes our classes more fun too, and I think it should be fun. That's why we're all here learning languages, right? It should be enjoyable. So I went a little over time, but we do have some time for questions, and we can stay. So thank you.
Feel free to ask
a few questions. If you do need to leave, if you're participating in the foreign language technology program, please be sure to sign up on the way out.
Oh, and I have some cards here if you want my email
And Felix
address.
has
It's
cards.
also on my website. So.
But yeah, questions? Feel free.
Yeah.
So I teach a little obscure language from Sweden.
Yeah.
Not too far.
It's known though. So.
Yeah. I'm definitely in need of having students interact and work together outside the classroom. And I love all the ideas again here, and especially the second part when I discovered that there are sort of games and things that I could use that are more structured than your first idea of using. You started off by saying that the games, it's like immersion. You go out there and you swim, and that to me is a little problematic because the students have very little time and just it's like input plus 1. No, it's input plus 100 and stuff.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yeah.
But do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, that's, as I said, it really depends on how you use it. Most of the games that I use are individual students. I pair them up with games. I try, and the students enjoy it. They're like, oh, you play games, but you're a professor. And I'm like, yeah, I'll talk about them. And then all of a sudden, I'm talking about the zoo game with the students, and then I'm talking about this medical game, and I've talked about history games and different things with students. I'm like, well, have you play this all the time? Well, why don't you switch it to German? And then they do, and they discover that this is very powerful to them because it really is an efficiency of creating both things. And if you're interested, you're going to figure it out. If you go abroad after 3 years of German, it's way over your head too. It's way too much, right? But you're figuring it out. And so if you want to be there, then yes, they're going to figure it out. If you put it into a class, into a structured thing and have everybody do it, you can't do it. There are some attempts, like some people try to play, some professors I know played World of Warcraft. I'm not a big fan of that, where they have the whole class play. I think that's too immersed. That is something that you have to do personally. But I think it's important because it's your responsibility as a learner. It's you learning. It's not the professor making you. You're learning, and people need to realize that I'm doing this. It's not somebody else making you do this. And so if they figure this out, what their strengths are. I'm increasingly spending time on that. It's like maybe they hate games. Well, then let's look at some podcasts. So I'm trying to match the students with what their passions are and finding that and connecting them to that so that when they leave the program, when they leave the college, they're like, oh, I'm subscribed to this podcast now about X, Y, and Z. I know what I'm doing now. Because oftentimes they leave and they're like, well, what do I do now? And then they turn to Rosetta Stone and then they're not learning anything new and it's not something meaningful. So pairing things up, it's a lot of work. And I know that in some teacher situations it's difficult if you have over 100 students, but it's important to help them think this through. I think it's more important. So I spend sometimes just the whole class on looking at resources. What can you do to make this more important? And I build that into my class. They have a number of options. They can play a game, they can watch a movie, they can come to the language table, they do a number of activities that they choose that are most meaningful, and then they write something about it. So it's putting the responsibility back to them, where I can say, I can only do so much, you're going to have to do the learning in the end. And it may be hard, but it's going to be easier if you care about it. And I think that's the main thing. These games, as an 11-year-old, were way over my head, and I figured it out. When I first studied abroad at age 14, that was way over my head, but it helped me grow tremendously. And so matching this and getting people passionate about something. And games are just one of that. If they hate games, don't make them play games, right? So figure this out. So the games are just one part, but my main idea is that they need to find something that they care. So the games can be something different, and the games can be serious. They don't have to be silly. And I think that's increasingly we need to do that as educators, and look at beyond the actual curriculum. And that's really hard. I realize that because I also teach in a one-on-one class. They need to know this, this, and this so that the next professor knows what I've taught. But that doesn't mean that I can't put this in. So sometimes I use 5 minutes at the end of class to talk about something, and I bring in a podcast, or I show them model different things, and then talk to students when they stay. So I think that's created that's been very meaningful to me, and the students care about it. I mean, when they write those essays about the games that they played, sometimes they hate them, but that's okay. Then I say, well, write why you didn't like the games. That's important, right? Then tell me what you like to do. And so, but they never hate all of them. They like some of them, and they never agree, which is interesting. And we know that learner difference, individual learner difference, are enormous, and there's just more and more research coming out about them. The differences between our learners are huge, and it's really hard to have 30 of the students and teach them individually. I think that's a big issue. It's very hard, and so this may be one way of dealing with that. It's not a holy grail, and that's what I wanted to make sure. The industry and some administrators think that this could solve our issues. This will not solve our issues. This is one tool in our arsenal. The same way that reading a good poem is a good tool. The same way that having role plays in class or discussion groups. All of these things are good tools. So this is just one that we should have at our disposal. And I don't use this in all my classes. It really depends on the part. And I know the problem is always when I give a talk that has one topic, it seems like, oh, he's always teaching them this game. No, I mean, I'm a very much bread and butter, interactive person who teaches a lot of face-to-face, and so the games are just one part of it. It's really, I don't know, it's probably less than 5%, but it is a part of it. It's not something I would neglect. So, and the students are the experts. You're going to be amazed if you think, well, I didn't grow up as a gamer, and well, have them explain it to you. They love that. They love to talk, especially K through 12 students. They love to talk about those games because that's what they play. That's what their reality is. And we always ask them about sports and about their pets and their family. But they also want to talk about games. They also want to talk about their families. People want to express themselves. It's a very basic human need. So neglecting that, I think that's not a good part. So see this both as a concrete, this is, in some ways, I hope the 20 questions game was somehow showing you that this can be something concrete. A lot of this still needs development over years. And that's why the Horizon report really puts this out the next years. We still need to think more about this. It's really hard. If this were easy, we would all be doing this. There would already be a game where students would just click and play and learn, and it's just not out there. But it might be, and I think we can, we need to work, and some initiatives are fantastic. I have a link up there on ARIS. Have you heard about that? University of New Mexico has this Mentira project based on this ARIS platform made by the University of Madison, Wisconsin. And it's a storytelling game that you can program. The students go out and speak in Spanish. They get different tasks on their mobile devices, and then it says go there, and then they go there, and then through GPS it knows, oh, you're here, now you're going to get the next clue. And so they're literally physically walking through the environment, and then it says go to the shopkeeper who's been let in and do an interview and kind of drive the story forward. Now these projects are absolutely fantastic, but you need a research staff and a development staff for all of these. So that's just not feasible. So a lot of these ideas would be fantastic, they're just not feasible, right? But that doesn't mean that in 5, 10, 20 years that may be feasible. So a lot of this is sci-fi still, but I think it's coming. So yeah, any other questions?
Thank you for speaking. You spoke about how it's important to let students have their own identity and put their own interests into what sort of games they pursue, especially outside of class. Did you find any help, or that it would have helped when you tried to link games that were popular in the L2 culture with student base? Like you mentioned karaoke, and immediately I thought, oh my gosh, I wish I'd had that in my Chinese class because it's huge in China.
Oh yeah.
And that's like how.
Oh yeah. I mean,
that's how I learned half my vocabulary.
Yeah, no, it's true. We did. I mean, and it goes beyond games. Like when when I was at Pomona, I supported Japanese too, and we did a lot of manga storytelling, for example, there, and that was really part of it. So the students created these, and there's different cultures too about gaming. I mean, Japanese gaming culture is very different from Western gaming culture, but it's mostly Western dominated, especially English-speaking dominated genre, right? And so if you teach English, fantastic. If you teach German, there's some games, but it's for some of the lesser taught languages, it's hard to find games that are situated in the culture, and that is an issue. And I really wished I was teaching English, back in Germany or something, because that'd be amazing games I could use. And so the resources aren't there for many languages. And especially with Chinese, we've had trouble finding games, for example. And so it really depends on the language you teach. If it's a less commonly taught language, it's probably going to be harder. And so that part, that's why I'm always going back and forth about should I continue on with this gaming or not. There's a lot of interest in this, but there's a lot of difficulties and a lot of things that we still need to work through in the coming years. But especially those who are in this program and who are going to be teachers for a long time, this is a great field of interest. And whenever at conferences people talk about this stuff, and even if it's something that you may not be doing yourself, it's at least professionally, it's good to know about this, because there are more computer games programs nationwide, internationally, more journals coming up, every year, and so this is increasingly an academic point of interest. Just like other media, movies, films, we don't even talk about that anymore. They're part of everything nowadays too. So games maybe, in the distant future may become that too. So we'll see.
We have to get him back to Memphis.
But do send me an email or be in touch, and there's some more stuff on my website to look at, and hopefully I'll meet you at a conference. ACTFL, anyone going to ACTFL? So I'll be there too. Okay.
All right.
Or are you going to email that?
We'll post his presentation on the FLTP site.
No. I'm gonna go.